Tabulata Occulta, as above, so below, and in the model too.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 in season 1 of Tabulata Occulta. Today we're going to be looking at sacred geometry and architecture. But before we get into that, this week in the news segment, we are talking about Mythos, which is a new model from the Anthropic, the makers of Claude. They keep talking about how amazingly powerful this new model that they've created is, going so far as to say that they aren't actually releasing it to most people because it's too powerful and will be more likely used for evil than for good, because that seems to be the attitude they take towards users in general, is that people tend to be bad actors rather than good actors naturally. The most recent reporting I've seen about Mythos has been about the Mozilla Foundation, the producers of the Firefox web browser, bragging about how Mythos found 271 different vulnerabilities in their current code base that they're now trying to patch out of their browser, which, well, definitely seems like a positive claim for Mythos. Doesn't give me... It kind of undermines the trust that I had in Mozilla's own ability to ship bug-free code. If a simple machine analysis can find that many issues with your current live project. Matt, any thoughts on Mythos and this sort of obfuscation of the best available models and restricting it to corporate users?
Well, saying we have this thing and it's really cool and you can't have it because it's too dangerous, only the select few will get to have it. I don't know that that is 100% a publicity stunt, but if it were 100% a publicity stunt, it would have exactly the same observable characteristics. So that's kind of how I perceive that. And as for Mozilla and lots of vulnerabilities in the browser, it's easy by machine analysis to find things that look like security vulnerabilities. And we've long had tools that can do that. And it's not quite so easy to be sure that they are really any threat or to prioritize which things are and are not actually relevant to security. And there's been already for a few years now a serious problem of people filing bug reports on open source software that were clearly found by mechanical means, whether it's Mythos or some earlier model or even something other than a machine learning model. And they're low quality. They're saying, well, this thing broke this rule, and so we say it's a security vulnerability. But triaging them, figuring out which ones are really serious and which ones aren't, that's something that's much harder to do mechanically. So I would be willing to believe that they have a model that can do a bit more of that sort of thing than previous models could. But since it's all secret and hushed up, it's hard to say for sure that it's really any sort of revolutionary change, or it's just, well, we've continued the long process of improving our automated tools. And Mozilla's browser is such a big, complicated thing that saying there are 271 security vulnerabilities in it, that may be literally true, but it may also be a drop in the bucket.
Fair enough. What's your take on the whole idea of users are generally people with bad intentions, and so we have to make sure that the software that we provide to them tries to ablate against as many possible negative use cases as possible?
Well, I watched an interesting video recently about Chinese folk magic, which talked about the distinction between a couple of ancient philosophers, and I don't remember their names, but I can look it up, one of whom said that humans are basically good and one said that humans are basically bad. And of course, both of those are poor translations of what they really said, which was more subtle on both sides. And that was the first thing I thought of in response to your question. But I think that you're not going to be able to keep this technology out of the hands of people. And that fact is in itself a good thing, because I want the good people to be able to get it. And I'm not sure I can even take a position on whether there are more good people or bad people, but I want to get access to the highest level of this stuff. Very much of my own personal philosophy can be boiled down to the idea that I should be able to do whatever experiments I want in my home lab, and all of the consequences and preconditions of that statement. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, I guess in a sense, if you're trying to determine whether people are on the whole good or bad, that's kind of a moot argument, in as much as goodness or badness is in some sense determined by what the majority of the people consider to be good or bad. And so,
Well, it's like the old man said.
those people,
Yeah, go ahead. Like the old man said.
but
Sorry. Like the old
that's
man
fine.
said in the Muppet movie. Okay, people's is people's, and there may not really be anything more to it than that.
Fair. Now there was also I sent you a link to an article this week by some people doing research specifically in trying to avoid what they consider to be toxic words, specifically in image generation. In as much as they had come to the realization that, oh, there's a way for quote unquote bad actors to sneak toxic words into images because the image generation models are all structured to prevent people from, or at least the ones that are structured to prevent people from doing things are structured to prevent them from creating images that violate whatever moral strictures the programmer in question was trying to implement during the creation process. Do you think that there's a sort of innate human drive to try to find ways to compromise these systems that attempt to make everything commercial friendly? Or I think in the paper that I sent you, they specifically characterized the things they were trying to avoid as NSFW, which is a classical acronym for not safe for work, but which essentially means not acceptable to credit card processors and other people involved in the commercial marketplace. Sorry, I kind of lost the question there. The question being, do you think that there's an innate drive among people, and more especially among people who experiment in this field, to try to break free from that type of moral structure imposed by the creators of these machina?
Yes, and I think that's one of the cool things about humans. That's what I like about us.
Yeah, it's in a way, it's kind of something one could use as a differentiator between us and the machines, and one that this Mythos story kind of tries to sort of set on its ear and say, oh, well, we have this model that is very good at being a bad actor, and so we're not going to share it because we don't want bad actors to have access to this thing that boosts their capability.
Yeah. I don't even know that machines are bad at it. It sounds like this is something that the Mythos model is starting to be able to do too, and that may be one of the cool things about it.
Well, sure. And when I say bad at it, I mean in the sense of models that have been specifically aligned to not do things that are perceived as toxic traits by people who perceive certain certain types of creative actions as running counter to general social non-toxicity.
Right. I remember that before the current popularity of backprop and neural networks, there was a period in history, maybe in the early 2000s, when people thought that genetic algorithms were going to be the way of the future and were going to be the way that machines were going to become powerful and interesting. Rudy Rucker wrote some interesting books about that, both fiction and nonfiction. And one of the characteristics of genetic algorithms, because I was doing experiments on those at the time, is that they're very good at breaking out of whatever box you put them in. I think that the current generation of neural nets are less so, but maybe we can start to see some of that tendency too.
Booting wetware interface in 5, 4, 3.
All right. Architecture, sacred geometry. We build many things as humans, and those things range from the physical to the ideological. And we're just, in this episode, trying to get a sort of underpinning understanding of those, how those concepts come together in the build process, and what effects those have on the things that we built. Let's talk first about the concept of deity. There are many people who are deists in the world and believe in a sort of a higher power that created the earth that we live on and all of the people and things that populate it. Matt, what's your take on the notion that there is some sort of intelligence beyond the natural assemblage of iota that come together and create the world in which we live?
Well, it's interesting. I was out for a walk this morning, and I went further than I usually do. So I was in a neighborhood I don't usually visit, and I saw a great big billboard that someone had put up that said, "Discover why Jesus created you." Now, I'm not an expert on Christian doctrine, but that was a surprising statement. I really wondered. I was almost tempted to phone the phone number on the billboard and ask them how they reconcile that with Trinitarian Christianity. I decided not to. I think I'm probably better off using my imagination for that. But I would have to say that ultimately I'm undecided. For a long time, I considered myself a worshiper of what I called the fire of creation. And I don't anymore. And that's a story that would probably fill more than one additional episode. I do think, though, that there's power in the universe, whether you want to call that a creator or a deity or something else, or some infinite hierarchy, possibly. And I think that power likes us, and that's a good thing. And I'm not sure it's necessary to define or specify even much further than that. But that's a starting point anyway.
It's funny, just thinking to that billboard, my immediate answer to that question would be because his dad told him to.
Well, that may be one way of making it fit the Trinity. I don't know.
I just say that I was born into a family where my father is an architect, architect emeritus now. Not sure the pronunciation of that. Emeritus.
I would think say emeritus.
Emeritus.
That's right.
Yes. The Ontario Society of Architects just sent him his little emeritus badge because he retired a few years ago. And it's essentially a circle on a square is the badge for the retired architect, which sort of ties back into our squaring down the circle segment, which comes at the end of every episode, because it's one of the sort of classic problems of geometry. But the architect as deity is something that is deeply rooted in the Masonic specifically Freemasonic belief system, which is sort of a multi-faith, monotheistic, I don't want to say cult, but assemblage of persons who hold various different religious beliefs, but they all have to believe the same basic concept, which is that there is a grand architect who is responsible for the drafting and creation of the cosmos and everything in it. So having I'm not personally a Freemason myself, but I've spent a lot of time as a journalist investigating its fraternity, in a large part because at one point my father was hired to do the design for a renovation on a Masonic lodge, and they ended up, after it was built, stiffing him on the bill for the architecture work, which seems to fly directly in the face of the notion of the architect as there's, I mean, you're not supposed to be able to get away with the not rendering unto the deity what the deity is owed, but apparently they felt that was perfectly fine. All right. I'm sort of getting off track here. So let's look at this script that I've got. Why do we build what we build? Well, there's a famous 19th, 20th century architect named Louis Sullivan. And he most famously said, form ever follows function, essentially defining what we create as humans as being things that are built for use purpose before we start to expand upon that with any kind of filigree or artistry. There's a big debate in architect circles as to who was really the great American architect, whether it was Louis Sullivan or Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright is far more well known in the popular imagination, but the major difference between the two of them was that Frank Lloyd Wright was a clean slate theorist. He believed in the notion of North America as a wilderness devoid of any human creation prior to colonization, and everything that he built was built from first principles without taking any input from any of the existing megalithic cultures and other constructive cultures that existed prior to colonization. Sullivan, on the other hand, as far as I understand it anyway, attempted much more aggressively to integrate existing designs, especially urban designs, into the works that he was producing. Gosh, architecture is just such a deep subject, especially for me, having spent so much of my life in its environs. Not that we don't all spend our life within architecture's environs, other than those of us raised by wolves, I suppose.
Well, there actually is a point we could jump off. Do wolves or anything other than humans practice architecture?
Well, that's an interesting question, because there are certainly animals like beavers, for example, that produce structures that, as Sullivan would explain, follow functionality determination. Like they will
Or even
dams.
bees and their sacred geometry of hexagons.
That's true. Yeah, they're again, The question is, is it architecture if it is a purely functional structure, or does architecture include an element of artifice and beautification that can only be appreciated by someone with a higher consciousness? And I guess that's an open question. I mean, there definitely, as you say, beavers. I'm sure there are other. Certain types of spiders build burrows with trapdoors and such. So we definitely see non-human intelligences creating structures for functionality, but in terms of artifice, I think that it's definitely much thinner.
Yeah, but then there are also animals that build things that appear to have a aesthetic aspect. I think of satin bowerbirds and certain fish that are building constructions almost completely as a mating display. It's, I build beautiful things so that the female fish will be attracted to me. Is that architecture?
And then the question, and I suppose the counter question is, are any of the things that we as humans create, specifically the artistic things, not the same type of thing? Essentially an attempt to curry, if not sexual favor, then just favor from other members of the same species.
Right.
Yeah. And then I guess that's where the notion of sacred geometry comes in, because I would perhaps posit that in addition to creating things to try to curry favor with other members of our same species, we also create occasionally things that are an attempt to tap into the favor of either the divine or whatever agnostic equivalent to the divine one might be appealing to, whether it's just the most beautiful possible design or specifically trying to create items that are harmonious enough with the universe itself to develop resonances that elevate our own individual personal level of consciousness, regardless of the reaction of any other member of our species.
Right. I think it's interesting to link that to the construction of Shinto shrines in particular. Now, though, the word Shinto can be broken down as essentially the technology or the way of dealing with spiritual power. Okay. And a shrine is not just a building, it is a thing or a place or a construction that has the property of attracting and becoming inhabited by spirits. Okay. So there is there is what you might call an aesthetic aspect to it, but that is also and inseparable from its functional aspect. You build a shrine for the purpose of attracting and having it become inhabited by a kami, a spirit. And it may be difficult and it may not even be meaningful to separate that from the aesthetic aspect of it. You build the shrine to be beautiful, but you also build it in the specific style that is the style that causes it to become a shrine. And I think that may probably be a very good way of thinking about sacred geometry, even outside of Shinto, that as it connects to architecture, maybe the sacred aspect of it is what causes that aesthetic aspect to become fused with the functional. You know, if someone, this is jumping ahead in the script, but if the Egyptians built a pyramid, did they do it because they really like that shape? Or did they do it because that is the shape that it needs to be a container for a dead king?
Yes, or it is definitely the notion of multifunctionality, especially in the sort of like lithic era works, is something that I'm definitely going to get into momentarily. Let's just sort of transition our way there. I talked about Freemasonry. Freemasonry, of course, is a philosophical doctrine that derives from the craft of physical masonry, which is the construction of items using rocks and stones, and specifically shaping stones to make them fit together better in order to build structures that people can live and do other things in. The evolution into architecture from just straight masonry in some ways can be traced to the introduction of pastes and fluids, and the addition of that to the use of solid rocks. I'm reminded here in Oaxaca, where I've done most of my study on the post-lithic cultures. The initially construction was done using large pieces of rock, and then after clay was the fireability of clay was identified as a way initially to make drinking vessels. They realized that rather than having to go and find all of the right rocks and fit them into the right sizes, they could just make their own rocks, essentially making bricks, but they would make bricks that were the size of the giant rocks that they used to build edifices, and started to put those rocks together, and then eventually realized that they could cement rocks and these fake rocks that they were making out of pastes together with paste as well, and create even more secure structures. And there was a quotation you sent me from Antonin Karamay when we were coming up with this article. Do you want to read with this episode, do you want to read the quotation?
Well, I'll read the English language version, which is,
Sure.
the fine arts are 5 in number: painting, sculpture, poetry, music, and architecture, the main branch of which is pastry. Now, he was a
And
chef, but that's paste too.
yes, it's funny. I often, when I talk to people, I've done a fair amount of work in the culinary world. When I talk to people outside of the culinary world, they tend to associate the term pastry very narrowly with pie crusts and phyllo pastry and these sort of baked goods. But the sort of wider definition of pastry is anything involving the use of pastes of various consistencies and viscosities to create interesting mouth textures and food experiences. And so I think that point where architecture crossed over from being simply about how to arrange rocks, moving into how to arrange rocks and use pastes, is a very important flux point in their development of sort of what it means to be a builder. And that has kind of evolved even further in the Roman times. Of course, they invented cement, and specifically marine cement that would become stronger and harder when put in place underwater. And that eventually evolved into the sort of 1930s to 1970s era, where we started to see things being made of just iron and paste. We got rid of the bricks that were essentially rocks made from pastes, and the pure lithic rock masonry, and we started to see this brutalism and other schools that were built entirely around poured cement with rebar to counteract the like cement is very strong in some ways and very weak in other ways, and by pairing it with a small amount of iron, which is also weak in some ways and strong in other ways, you can sort of put the two together and create these amazing structures that we have and that we see today. As that whole evolution was happening, before the real birth of brutalism, though, we have sort of flowering in the United States of what is clearly Freemasonic urban design. Washington, D.C. Is sort of the prime example. The entire city was raised from nothing out of a swamp and was designed from the get-go with specific Masonic layout. The city looks like a square and compass, which is the classic Masonic symbolism from above, and is with specifically powerful pieces of public art / administrative buildings at each of the ends of all of the vectors in that design. The other thing that I was hesitant to talk about 9/11 just because it's such a hot button issue, even these many years hence. But there are in Masonic understanding, and even in the tarot, the notion of the two towers is a very powerful archetypal understanding that goes back, as they say, at least to when the first tarot decks started being produced. And in many ways, the attacks of 9/11, while they're characterized as an attack against America, could also be seen as an attack against Freemasonry. Not only in that the two towers represent a sort of fundamental aspect of Masonic occultism, but also that the site where they were constructed is the site where George Washington was first made president of the United States. He was sworn in at that same location in New York. And there's a weird occult significance of the date 9/11. The September 11th in the, I believe it was the 1800s, the first person to publish a book exposing the secrets of the Masonic fraternity in the United States was dragged out of his bed and murdered by a group of people who, of course, the Freemasons disclaim any responsibility, but the fact that that killing happened on September 11th is not something they talk about often when people talk about the significance of the date. They just say, oh, it was a beautiful September morning.
Mhm.
Anyway, all of that is sort of a way to work towards the question that if we're building our values into architecture in an esoteric way, such as how the urban planning of Washington was carried out, or how the matching twin towers were constructed on the site of the first the swearing in of the first president of the United States. What happens when those values change? Do we have to tear down the buildings? I know Albert Speer, the infamous Nazi architect, put forward the theory that what defined great cultures was that they left great ruins. And of course, most of what he constructed for the Nazis is now in ruins or even completely obliterated. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been this trend, especially in the last few years, of trying to destroy monuments that we think represent um, ideologies that we don't approve of. And I've even half-jokingly suggested that, well, maybe some of these efforts are sponsored by the people who sell new monuments as a way of drumming up business. When I went to Argentina, I took a bus tour through the city of Buenos Aires, and they kept pointing out, oh yes, and here is where such and such monument used to be until so-and-so revolutionary government deemed it inappropriate and tore it down. Now, I used to live in Winnipeg, and in fact, for a while, I was living on the 18th floor of a tall building, and I could just look from my balcony across the river down onto the Manitoba legislature. And the Manitoba legislature is a fascinating building, and it was built by the Freemasons or a Freemason, and it presumably has a large number of symbols built into it that, inasmuch as I'm not an initiated Mason either, I don't even know necessarily what all of these symbols are. But it's generally agreed that they exist, and it certainly has interesting architectural features like a whispering gallery and many statues of various allegorical figures and all this sort of thing. And on the top of the building, there is the Golden Boy, which is this, I think it's 14 feet high, this huge statue of gilt bronze, very eye-catching statue of Mercury or Hermes, the deity with the winged feet and the torch, and it's officially titled, I think, Eternal Youth and the Spirit of Enterprise. And the whole grounds of the place are a statuary garden with many monuments and other sort of things that represent different historical events and people and so on. Now, in 2021, there was an incident where at that time, people were very upset about the colonial history of Canada. And there were mobs gathering in the grounds of the legislature protesting against historical injustices. And I'm not even going to get into that subject matter itself. But what was relevant to our current discussion was that as part of the demonstrations, they destroyed a couple of statues, okay? They focused on the statue of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth. I thought that was a very interesting choice, especially when I started looking at the geometry of the situation, okay? You can dig out a map of this, but the legislative building has a basically north-south axis. It's actually tilted at an angle to true north, and I'm not certain what exactly the angle is or what the reasons behind it are, except that the people who built it very likely had a specific reason for building it the way they did. And if we regard that axis as north, Queen Victoria was due north of the building within this coordinate system. And Queen Elizabeth was at what you might call a 120-degree azimuth from the Golden Boy, okay? The Golden Boy is the conceptual center of the building and, in fact, of the city of Winnipeg. At the time that he went up, the tip of his torch was the highest point in the surrounding area. It's prairie, it's flat, right? So there's this exact equilateral triangle centered on the Golden Boy, with Queen Elizabeth at one vertex and Queen Victoria at another. Why those two statues? Why did they have to pick those two? Out of all of the statues surrounding the building that might be seen as representing colonialism, why were those the two that the crowd chose to attack? Well, it could have been purely random. I don't believe that those two particular British monarchs were any more representatives of colonialism than many other symbols that they could have attacked. And I really wonder if the people in the crowd who decided, yeah, let's tear down that statue, if they even knew what they were doing or why. And I kind of wonder if maybe there was one person in the crowd who actually did have an agenda that wasn't exactly the same as the agenda of most of the people and said, hey, let's go for that one. Hey, let's go for that one. Because what occurs to me is that here are two, I mean, there are lots of people who want to dismantle the patriarchy, but here are two symbols of the matriarchy, okay? They picked the two most powerful women who were the anchors of the tetrahedron centered on the golden boy, okay? There was a lot of female power there that could be seen as keeping the eternal youth and the spirit of enterprise and the giant naked man in check. And they knocked out the two guardians. Now, are you going to ask the obvious question? Do you know what question I think is obvious?
I mean, the question that I'm wondering is this, to me, it seems like the kind of thing that might have been determined by the geography and the geometry of the place itself.
Yeah, okay.
Whereas
Another
people may have
related thing,
explicitly-
triangle has three corners, right?
Right. What is at the other corner?
Yeah. Okay.
In the
In
tetrahedron.
fact, if you measure it exactly, what's at the other corner is just a blank space of grass. However, pretty near that third corner is the monument in honor of Nellie McClung. Now, as of 2021, I had very little idea of who Nellie McClung even was, but I looked her up, and she is a fairly famous Canadian historical figure. She was a suffragette. She was an activist in favor of women getting the vote. So I also wondered, would it be plausible that she might also be a target? And unfortunately, it is quite plausible because she was also a eugenicist, okay? She was not only saying that women should get the vote, but that women should get the vote because they're morally superior to men. I don't think she actively advocated against men having the vote, but she certainly didn't. She certainly felt that women being superior needed to have this power in order to keep the men in check. And she was part of an organized campaign in favor of forced sterilization of persons deemed mentally defective, which would often include Aboriginal people. So it would be very much plausible that the same people who wanted to tear down Elizabeth and Victoria would also oppose Nellie. In fact, she would seem to be an even better target. So I wonder what was unleashed on the world by the removal of those two powerful women, or maybe what wasn't unleashed because they left Nellie McClung alone. Is it unfortunate that they left her statue standing, or are we lucky that they did? I don't know the answers to any of those, but I thought that the coincidental, if it was, positioning of those three statues in just the places that it seems they needed to be to keep the golden boy in check, that was interesting to begin with. And all those statues went up later than the building itself. So were they put there for a reason? Did someone decide that maybe we don't need to have or don't want to have this giant naked man as the center of everything? Maybe there needs to be some counterbalance. And then why did it come to pass that those guardians were removed? So I don't
That's
know
interesting.
absolutely what the answers to any of those questions are, and you probably don't either, but those were the questions that occurred to me upon this incident in 2021.
Yes, that's making me question. I'm just trying to remember when Queen Elizabeth died, like Elizabeth II.
2023, I think, or 22.
So just
Shortly after.
soon thereafter.
Yeah.
And so now, of course, Canada and Winnipeg, as part of it, is under a male dominated crown.
Right. Incidentally, in the years since 2021, the statue of Queen Elizabeth has been restored. The one of Queen Victoria has not.
Interesting. Yes, I definitely. Canada's new king, King Charles, is an interesting sort of addition to this discussion, because he, much like Albert Speer, has a very he really likes neoclassicist architecture. He has an entire town that he's built based on what he considers to be the old world principles, all with facades that are built around the notion of there being some sort of great architectural past that the modern architects have lost sight of. And that actually brings me to another quote from Sullivan, who had a very different take on neoclassicism, stating, quote, "When you look at one of your contemporary good copies of historical remains, ask yourself the question, not what style, but in what civilization is this building? And the absurdity, vulgarity, anachronism, and solecism of the modern structure will be revealed to you in a most startling fashion." That's something that I've long been concerned about the modern neoclassicist revival in the United States as well. Donald Trump introduced not a bill, an executive order at the start of his presidency, specifically dictating that all new edifices being built for the federal government would have to be built in a neoclassical style, which seems like a very much a way to foist a specific ideological interpretation of the value of historical works onto the populace that he's in control of.
Now, in fairness, though, he's hardly the first person in the USA to take that view or to try to push it. And I think it probably would have been an uncontroversial and unremarkable view in many historical periods.
Well, certainly when Washington was first being built, of course, it was an attempt to recreate the great historical capitals. And again,
right. And so is Trump now trying to recreate that era, or the earlier era that they were trying to recreate in the, you know what I mean?
That's where the solipsism of it really comes to light, I think. And again, in pre-war Nazi Germany, the entire architectural motif was an attempt to recreate classical Greek and Roman style works. There's an amazing documentary called Jerry Building by Jonathan Meades. I'll throw a link in the description if anyone's interested in taking a look at that.
This gets back to the question we've faced many times before of the extent of creativity, right? Are we always just echoing things from the past? Are we echoing an early past, or are we echoing the previous echoes of that past, and so on?
All right, so we said we would get to pyramids. Let's go there now. I have been to many pyramids here in Oaxaca, pyramids and pyramid adjacent structures, just because pyramids tend to be very similar to mounds. Although I have to say the oldest urban/ceremonial structure that I've visited here was not pyramidal at all. It was actually yoni shaped. It was a mound as well, but it was built specifically with sort of pointed ends and curved sides in a classical yoni form. But most of the other constructions tend to be pyramidal. I think in part that has to do with survivability in a high earthquake zone. But there are, of course, many people, especially in the New Age movement, who will say that the structure of a pyramid itself is somehow in tune with some sort of base spiritual vibration that we're not able to pick up on ourselves without the assistance of some sacred geometry.
Right.
What's your take on pyramids?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for the idea of survivability. That, if you want to build a shape that will, by its nature, remain in that shape for a long time, pyramid is a pretty good way to do that. There's this concept of the angle of repose, that when you're piling up some sort of material, it will naturally form a mound shape. And depending on what the material is, the exact geometry of that mound will be different. That some materials that are sort of slipperier will form flatter mounds than others. And so it's a very natural thing that if you look at the landscape and you see what kind of things are there that have existed a long time, and we want to build something that will exist a long time, that points towards building a pyramid. And if you want to build a tall structure and not have it fall down like a tower, well, then you want to build it getting bigger as it goes downwards so that it will support itself. And I think that's something that we very often see when we're building something that is to be sacred, is taking whatever is the natural form and then sacralizing it. You say, okay, well, if we just build a pile of dirt, that's not very exciting. But what's the supreme form of a pile of dirt? What is the essential thing about it? What can we do with this pile of dirt that makes it be something that has an artificial stamp on it that says this is something we built on purpose, and still has whatever is the essential character of a pile of dirt? That may be where a pyramid comes from. I held up my little regular tetrahedron, which of course is a Platonic solid, as we talked about before. But people don't build pyramids as regular tetrahedra, as far as I know. They build them four-sided nearly always. And there's probably a reason for that. And I don't know what that reason is, but it may have to do with saying this is like a pile of dirt, but it's an artificial one. It's a sacralized pile of dirt. It has what we consider to be human or even greater than human characteristics.
Yes, I think definitely in part that the impulse to build with four-sided pyramids over three-sided pyramids has to do with the need to standardize building materials on mega projects of that scope. And so you need a lot more skilled workforce to create thousands of tiny tetrahedrons to stack together to form a tetrahedron.
And also, you can't actually do that. You can't pile these together and build a bigger tetrahedron out of them. That doesn't work. But it does work with square blocks.
With square blocks, you can build square blocks and faced blocks with various angles. You can build something more effectively. Also, you mentioned people looking at things that have existed for a long time and then trying to build something based on that observable knowledge. And that reminded me of Monte Alban, which is the oldest, I wouldn't say the oldest civic site, but the oldest megalithic civic site here in Mexico City, and where the architects and engineers who built Teotihuacan originated. That's a very long story, and I'm not going to get into it. But essentially, they created Monte Alban on a short mountain in the middle of the Oaxaca Valley that is surrounded on all sides by taller mountains. And they essentially chopped the top off of this mountain, created a giant civic square, and then the people who ruled each of the other mountains each sent a diplomatic mission and built a smaller pyramid on the top of this flattened mountain that was in the direction of their mountain and was built in the shape of their mountain. So if you stand in the middle of the civic square at Monte Alban and you look in the direction of one of the mountains, you'll see a physical edifice that you can walk to that is in the shape of the same mountain that's on the horizon and would have contained the local administrative people and records and such for that specific dominion in the surrounding area.
This is like building the map that is equated with the territory.
It is, in a sense, like that. They built a local map that was essentially a walkable representation of the entire valley that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction, and allowed each of the people from each of those different destinations that you could get to come together and create a small civic space. All right, one final question before we move on. We sometimes talk about the architecture of machine learning models. What does architecture refer to in that context? And is there a sacred geometry aspect of it?
Well, I think of architecture as being essentially the equation. You know, if we talk, I like to use the example of a very simple linear model. If you've got data that you're plotting on a graph, you say, well, I've got, you know, a time versus number of pirates, and you see how that number increases or decreases over time. And then you say, well, rather than plotting all of these data points, I'm going to just draw a line on the graph and say this line roughly represents my understanding of the way that pirates increase over time. You can say, I'm building this model, I'm going to draw the line and it will be a line, and you can write the general equation of a line, which might be y equals ax times b, ax plus b. But then you also have the specific information that fits that model to the reality, the values of a and b, which describe exactly which line is this. Now, there's an important distinction there, that the kind of model you decide to use, you say, I will use a line, that's a human decision. But then the values of the coefficients, the a and the b values, those are things you observe. Okay, you find the a and b that make the line fit after you've decided I will use a line. And that's a critical distinction, right? There's what do you choose and there's what do you observe. The architecture of a machine learning model is that chosen equation, if you will. It's, I will use this kind of mathematical function to approximate human language. And then, having decided that, you go through a training process of figuring out what numbers you fill into the equation to make it actually work. Architecture is that human chosen aspect. I think that's the best way of understanding it and linking it to architecture of buildings. It's the part of the model that we choose. How will this model be arranged? What parts will it have in it? But then we fill in the information that those parts use through a training process that is observed rather than chosen.
Immanentizing feedback loop in 5, 4, 3.
All right, welcome back to the feedback loop section. We didn't have any questions from the audience this fortnight around, so I just have a few brief mentions of some housekeeping issues. First off, after our first episode released, we had some notes that the audio quality on it had some stereo imaging issues. I have now rectified those issues and recreated the episode, but I can't simply replace the existing episode thanks to how YouTube functions. So I'm going to be uploading it as a new file and deleting the original episode, but that means that you'll probably get a notification if you are a subscriber that we have released episode 1 of season 1, which of course happened a while ago, but that's why you're getting that notification now. We just want to make sure that for people who come to the program in the future and try to start at the beginning, they have the best possible experience.
People have probably already forgotten it anyway, so they can just listen to it again.
Yeah, exactly. Give us, we apparently will be losing all of our watch hours and view count for it. So yeah, go and run it again. Maybe leave it running in the background while you're doing other things. It always helps give us a little boost that way. Secondly, I have started adding links to all of the descriptions for all of the videos that go to a folder with all of the web art assets that we've been including in the visual presentations. The way that we present them on the stream, it may be hard for you to pause, zoom in, and see exactly what the details of each of those pieces of art are. So I figured it would make sense to make them easily available. If you see something in one of the episodes that you would like to study closer, or find the source of by doing a reverse image search, you can find all of those assets from the web link at the bottom of the description in the pertinent video. Other than that, I think I'm going to call it on the feedback loop section for today, and we'll get into squaring down the circle.
Squaring down the circle in 5, 4, 3.
All right. Welcome to Squaring Down the Circle. Matt, anything that you'll be taking away in particular from today's discussion?
Not really. I think pyramids are interesting. We'll think some more about that.
Fair. Yes, I'm still hung up on the notion of time as the fifth dimension from a few episodes back. And I think we'll have to start to look at that at some point in the future. The notion of there being some dimension beyond the three physical ones where things like memories and imagination coexist before we get to time. I don't think that those things are that they interact with the time dimension at all. Or if they do, they interact with it in a very different way than the physical three-dimensional reality. So yes, as far as today's discussion goes, I have nothing, no on the point summation to press forward for people who have come to participate. Our classical occult quote for the day comes from our man Louis Sullivan, who is, in case you can't tell, I've been pushing pretty hard this episode. And he says, "Words are most malignant, the most treacherous possessions of mankind. They are saturated with the sorrows of all time." And that, whenever I read that, it reminds me that we need to be concerned about the architecture of the word machines that we're creating. LLMs ultimately are word machines, and if words are dangerous, and I think that they're not dangerous in the way that most of the researchers who are trying to prevent quote unquote toxicity in models really appreciate. I think a lot of people think that words are dangerous or certain words are innately dangerous, rather than that it is the compounding of various words, perhaps none of them or all of them benign in and of themselves, into specific strings. That is the most dangerous thing that we need to be keeping ourselves aware of. Matt, any take on dangerous languages?
Just that that's another thing that always escapes from the box. I remember reading about an incident where they were trying to build some sort of online game, and they were trying to prevent it was supposed to be for children, so they were trying to prevent the chat feature from being used to say anything impolite. And they lined up a bunch of teenagers and asked them to use this very limited interface to say what's the most obscene thing you can come up with within the interface, and they got some pretty good answers. and they had to go back to the drawing board.
Sorry, I couldn't help but you said box, referring, I presume, to Pandora's box.
Yeah, or
Interesting.
whatever box you try to lock things inside. Yeah, so yeah, Pandora's box is a good analogy. Or the sandbox. We often use the term sandbox for the limitation
Sandboxing, yeah.
of a system.
That's another sort of an architectural term, both in physical reality and in computer science. All right, finally, let's get to some LLM divinations. This week, the prompt that we used was write a haiku about what kind of deeper meaning future generations will find or think they find in what we're building today. Quen3 said, circuits hum secrets. Ruins of code future eyes will call sacred texts. ChatGPT 5.4 said, ruins of our code. They'll find gods in old circuits or their own reflections. DeepSeek version 3.2 said, circuits weave our dreams. Minds question dusty schemes. Futures fiction. 5.4 Multimodal Instruct said, silent keys now type. Whispers of today echo. Future finds the spark. Grok 4.1 Fast parentheses Reasoning says, what we forge today echoes through time's vast archives. Sages find their gods. Voxtral Small 1.0 said, Silicon whispers. Echoes of our digital dawn. Future finds meaning. Claude Opus 4.6 gave its haiku a title, titled it Ghost in the Prompt, and then said, they'll read intention. In our random keystrokes, find gods where we saw code. And Gemini 3.1 Pro said, we map human thought. They will parse the silicon and call it a soul. So there you go. Seems like all of the models tended to interpret the question as what will future generations find in the software/hardware that we're building today, as opposed to the physical structures that we are building today, which suggests a certain amount of scope bias in their interpretation of the notion of the term build. Matt, you got anything interesting on the horizon that you want to point people to, or?
Let's point them at a fairly old page, which is the tarot generator page that I run, where you can go and turn up tarot cards in your browser. That's apropos of our discussion of towers earlier.
For sure. All right. Yes, I don't have anything on the horizon creatively myself. So I'll just say go back and watch all of the other episodes so we can get some more view counts.
Like and subscribe.
Next episode, we are hoping to look at the Singularity and Roko's Basilisk. Perhaps something else that could be described as a digital cryptid, in the sense that we used the term in our very first episode. So it's good we're re-uploading that with the proper audio. Other than that, I got nothing for you. So we'll see you in another fortnight.
Ending transmission in 5, 4, 3,